Good day, fellow fans of the comics, movies, television, and other things pop culture. I am the Comics Kid 2099, here for another rant video. Today, as you can see from the topic of this video, I want to talk about the severe lack of compelling and workable villains in the world of the X-Men. I've been reading Chris Claremont's run in the Black and White Essential books, and this occurred to me when I was reading the Dark Phoenix saga specifically. Before I go further, I want to clarify what I mean by workable. To me, if the majority of a villain or a group of villains' whole purpose is to get revenge on a hero for making him look like an idiot, then that isn't a very workable premise for a villain. I've talked about just what all needs to happen with an antagonist in some of my past reviews, and I will go into it yet again. As far as I'm concerned, a good villain needs to have a goal that makes sense. Consider one of the only X-Men villains who I actually like, Magneto. Magneto truly believes that the world is worse off with human beings holding the reins to world power. Most of his conflicts with the X-Men come from a conflict in ideology. Sure, there were a couple of times where the basis of the story was Magneto comes to the mansion to get revenge on the X-Men, or Magneto kidnaps the X-Men and brings them to Antarctica as a form of revenge. But more than any other X-Men villain, every time the X-Men fight him, it's because they have a legitimate conflict of interest with Magneto. And most of the time, they start fighting him because he is doing something to service his goals first. This is how every villain should be treated. And as I talk about these two groups of villains that the X-Men have faced, I hope it becomes apparent just how lacking this rogues gallery really is. The big one I wanted to complain about was the Hellfire Club. Growing up reading comics, I was always under the impression that the Hellfire Club was an organization of wealthy people with a secret inner circle determined to take over the world through business and politics. In other words, while Magneto wants to take the world through force, the Hellfire Club wants to do it through legitimate means. Now, honestly, this is an interesting concept that really has no place in superhero action comics. The X-Men can't rightly say, "Hey, Shaw, stop buying that company." And so the motives and goals of the Hellfire Club are made less interesting so that we have a vague reason for them to fight the X-Men. During the Dark Phoenix saga, the potential member of the club's inner circle, Mastermind, took control of Phoenix to further the goals of the Hellfire Club, that is, taking over the world. And with a powerful psychic on their team, this would be infinitely easier. And so it makes much sense why the X-Men would want to stop this. But then, every other encounter with the X-Men ever boiled down to, we just don't like those pesky do-gooders. Let's fight. I'm not even kidding. The second time the Hellfire Club fought the X-Men was quite nonsensical. For no real reason at all, Emma Frost and Sebastian Shaw cooked up a plan to switch Emma's mind with Storm's, so that Emma could infiltrate the X-Men and the pair of them could destroy their enemies. And you might say, well, that makes sense. The X-Men would likely want to stop the Hellfire Club from doing anything evil, so Shaw and Frost wanted to go in for the preemptive strike. Except that, no. Why would Shaw and Frost draw attention to themselves? Why not continue with the covert activities of slow and precise world domination? This fiasco ended with one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. Emma Frost says, and I quote, "Though we've lost this battle, the war between us shall not end until the X-Men are both dead and damned." Okay, really? This screams that Claremont had no idea how to do anything interesting with these characters, so he stooped to, every time they fight, it's because they want to get even for losing that last time. And that might be fine for a mindless thug who forgot why he was being a bad guy in the first place, but this is not fine for what is supposed to be a cabal of criminal masterminds and schemers. And I should mention that I actually want to like the Hellfire Club. I've always thought the idea of an organization of criminals with a hierarchy is interesting, but it's not enough. The characters still act like idiots, and it makes the victory of the X-Men seem less virtuous because the X-Men are fighting a group of morons who forgot how to think. In many ways, the same is true for the next villain I will be talking about, Mr. Sinister. This character is just a mess. Chris Claremont said that his original plan for Sinister was that a boy who grew up in the orphanage that Cyclops grew up in was an immortal mutant, and he was stuck as a 12-year-old, and he had some form of telepathic projection powers. So this boy eventually used his powers to create what he saw as an awesome villain, Mr. Sinister. And then, allegedly, this same boy would create what he saw as an awesome hero in the form of Gambit. None of this actually came to fruition, as nothing was ever really done with Sinister's backstory until 5 years after Claremont left the X-Men books in 1991. So it could be that Claremont was actually planning on assigning some kind of motivation to Mr. Sinister at some point. But we don't have some point. We only have what did happen. And what did happen, for the purposes of this topic, is crap. All we know about Mr. Sinister is that he hired the Marauders to kill the Morlocks, and that he wanted to clone Jean Grey, and he was obsessed with Scott Summers and his brother Alex, and all of that just came off as really creepy and kinda last minute and didn't make a whole lot of sense either. We don't even know why he did any of this. The Marauders even say why Mr. Sinister had the Morlocks killed. As par for the course, it makes no kind of sense at all, even if you fry your brain on Drano. They claim that he doesn't want other mutants around, so he's clearing the field, which is why the Marauders are also targeting the X-Men. This is rightly ignored years later after Claremont's departure, when Sinister's evil plans all revolve around making a baby from Jean Grey and Cyclops, which, honestly, this isn't really any better. There's only so far you can take a character with a scheme like this before it gets boring, not to mention that it's hard to frame the superheroes fighting the supervillain around a villain with this kind of evil long-term plan. As of now, Sinister's plans are basically conduct evil, stereotypical mad scientist experiments because I love science. It's really telling that this is Sinister's best, and even this is pretty stupid. The Hellfire Club and Sinister are the two biggest villains to show up on a recurring basis in Claremont's run on the X-Men during the 1980s. Since I haven't read nearly as much from the 1990s, I won't even go there until I've read more and can determine if the villains heavily featured in the 1990s are any better than what we got in the 1980s. I know it doesn't do me much good to complain about the poorly constructed character motivations I've talked about here, but it feels good to get it out in the open. And I hope this can serve as an example of what kinds of villainous characters actually do work, whether it's in movies, television, or comics. That's all I have for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you return to see and hear what else I have to say next time.